discuss here is artists' approaches to improvising and just different thoughts on music. It's kind of an intimate opportunity for you to have any questions if you'd like to ask Jim or Ernesto and Gelcer later on.
You're running, I think.
Oh, what's that?
Oh yeah, there. Got it.
Right. You might want to.
Hello.
Let's see. We'll just speak lightly. How's this? Okay. Okay. Great. Welcome, Jim Gelcer.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Jim.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Lucas. Nice to meet you finally.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We've had a back and forth for a while. So, can you recall if there was a specific moment when you became interested in playing music, drums, singing, jazz?
Well, as you, some of you might have heard when I was talking, I was born in South Africa, and I think as a young child, I just sort of grew up like watching the African musicians play, and I was fascinated. There's a picture of me as a really young child, like watching some African street musicians play, and you can see by my body language that I'm like leaning in, like, you know, really just very intently listening with my whole body, not just listening with my ears. And I think that was when I saw that picture later on as an adult, I thought, that's maybe where I got into it. And then, you know, there's also, came across a picture of me as a kid, probably 8 years old, sitting on the dining room floor with my mom's pots and pans,
the pots and the pans
around me, and playing them with chopsticks. And that's why I became a drummer, you know.
So sometimes it's just in you, right?
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah.
What about singing? Where did that start?
Singing. Well, I've always been a singer. You know, everybody, I think, is a singer, really. I mean, everybody sings. And I actually got more and more into singing through my yoga practice, and this is something that we've talked about, you and I, because I know you're involved in that too. But when I did my yoga teacher training, there's an element of the practice that involves singing, and it's mainly like call and response. And I just started doing that more and more, and then, you know, just one thing led to another, and I started singing jazz, and so that's been a more recent thing. I've been playing drums for like 35 years or something like that, but singing, I would say maybe like professionally, maybe 5 years, 6 years.
Okay, so do you see yourself as a drummer who sings or a singer who drums?
I think I'd probably describe it as the first one, a drummer who sings, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Right, so I'd like to discuss the album that you played a lot of excerpts from today, Melodies Pure and True.
Yeah. Which is available over at the
it's over there,
CD
so you're right, afterward if you want. Jim will be over there, so if you want to have a more intimate sort of chat or get his autograph or whatever, he'll be made available. So we got some tracks on here. We've got On a Clear Day, Will It Go Round in Circles, Three Little Birds, Little Wing. How did this repertoire come together? How did you choose?
Well, it actually came together a couple of years ago. I was playing with Reg Schwager, the guitar player, and another bass player named George Kohler, and we were just playing an outdoor summer gig like this, very similar to this, and we were just doing whatever we felt like doing, and ended up playing a lot of that repertoire. And it just was so nice. It just gelled so beautifully when we played together. And George said to me afterwards, you know, we should record this, we should make an album. And that's sort of how it got started. And then George helped me pick the repertoire as well. And then it was only afterwards that I looked at the repertoire and went, you know what, this is all music from the 60s and 70s, with the exception of one song. There's one song.
Which one's that?
The Sting tune, whatever that is.
Fields of Gold.
Yeah, Fields of
Gold.
That's from the 90s, but I think there's 11 songs and 10 of them are from either the 60s or the 70s.
Well, 10 out of 11 is great.
Yeah.
Right, so can you discuss the arranging process? Because you're not doing covers of these tunes, right?
Well, yeah, so the whole idea behind it was we wanted to create something that we could reproduce live. So there's no overdubbing. We did all the arrangements so that we were all playing live in the studio. And what I'm really proud of is that there are some, especially a few tunes that stick out for me, where it really sounds like there's more than 3 people playing, but it's actually only 3 of us. But we're doing some intricate things between the 3 of us that make it sound bigger, and we just worked out the arrangements together, in the studio, and that's how we did it.
Sort of like a power trio kind of concept, which is sort of apt because you chose to do Little Wing, which is a Jimi Hendrix tune, right?
Yeah. But we did our own version of that too.
You did. The main difference I noticed is that it was cast in 12/8, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah,
So
very good.
different, more laid-back kind of feel. And that was the first impression I had of you. The first track I heard you do was On a Clear Day.
Uh-huh.
And it sounded like an outdoors kind of festival sort of track.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same instrumentation. Is Reg on that one as well?
Yes, yeah, Reg and
Okay,
George.
So it was a sound that I figured really
would
nice.
translate to here, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it did. I hope you all agree. If anyone has any questions, you can just put your hand up and I'll come out and ask you. Don't be shy. Let's move on to your collaboration with Paul Hoffer. Can you tell me how that began?
Well, it's an interesting story. When I was also a little kid, I went to school with Paul Hoffert's children. If you don't know who Paul Hoffert is, he is one of the founders of the band Lighthouse. You remember that band? And very kind of legendary Canadian musician. He's got the Order of Canada. So as a kid, I went to school with his children, and one day, Lighthouse needed they needed a children's choir for one of their songs on their record. So they got a whole bunch of kids from our school to come to the recording studio, and that was my very first experience in a recording studio. And
It's been awesome.
it was a unique experience. I remember them saying, as like they kept saying, we would sing it, and they kept saying, okay, we like that so much, like from the control room we hear this voice, we like that so much, we'd like you to do it again. And I didn't really understand what that meant until years later. I remember thinking, oh, they probably didn't like it and they wanted us to do it again. Or either that, or they were doubling it, so they wanted more and more layers. But it was just a way of getting us. Anyway, that was my first experience with Paul, and then we ended up working together on some like digital media projects.
I read about this one, something that was a little bit ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Well, it was actually this. I could go on and on about this, but
I'm sure you could.
It was the precursor to Spotify and Netflix. We were working on it. We came up with the idea way before they did, and we raised money to do this, and we started talking to the major studios and labels about getting their content, and we were just so far ahead of our time that they weren't ready. And in the end, what ended up happening was we ran out of money and we had to fold our tents. But I think the guys from Spotify and Netflix picked up on it and ran with it.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those cases where an idea is good, but it needs to be the right place at the right time, right?
Yeah.
It just needs to be that kind of synthesis of moment.
Exactly.
The idea. Cool. So you met Paul Hoffer, and that's your first experience. Let's talk about your latest project with him.
So the latest project, you mean the one that's coming out in the fall?
Do you mind discussing that, or is
Sure.
it?
No, I can discuss it.
Okay.
So we were approached by the Glenn Gould estate to make an album of jazz Glenn Gould. So what does that mean exactly? We didn't really know either. So we thought about it, and we thought, well, the obvious thing would be to take some Bach and do it in jazz. But Paul and I are much more partial to Beethoven, so we decided to focus on Gould's Beethoven repertoire. So essentially we have an album of jazz Beethoven, and it's called Jim and Paul Play Glenn and Ludwig. And it's coming out on September 21st. It's going to be released, and then the release party is October 11th at the Jazz Bistro in Toronto.
It sounds like a really exciting project. Go ahead.
It seems a slightly strange thing to do. Why would the Glenn Gould Foundation want that? What was that?
That's a good question.
They were familiar with Paul and myself because both of us had served on the board of directors of the Glenn Gould Foundation, and the Glenn Gould's executor had heard our first album and really liked it. So I was having lunch with him one day, and he said, "You guys should make an album of jazz Glenn Gould," and that's how the whole thing started.
Nice. So this mixture of jazz and classical music, it has a bit of a tradition historically, and a term that's been used is third stream.
Oh, I've never heard that.
it was coined kind of the beginning of the 20th century. So some some examples of third string music are influences of jazz brought into classical, in examples like Debussy, Stravinsky,
Right.
Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue. But coming from the other side, like Charles Mingus or Duke Ellington, that people might be familiar with.
Yeah.
Can you tell me if you approached it from a certain side? Like obviously you're at a jazz festival, right? So maybe it's bringing classical in, or do you feel like it's actually running up the middle? Do you want to be independent of either one?
I mean, Paul is an incredible musician. I remember also as a child hearing one on a Lighthouse album where he starts off playing, I think it's Sonata Pathétique, and then from that, the pure classical of that, he launches into like a rock groove, and the band comes in and the horns come in, and I just thought that was like my first experience with how you could fuse different genres together. And I love classical. I've served also on the board of directors of the Toronto Summer Music Festival, which is a chamber music festival, and on the Glenn Gould Foundation board, and I love that sound. But you know, both Paul and I at heart are jazz musicians, so I think we just approached it from, you know, where our backgrounds and where we come from.
That's good. I know it's difficult if you're casting something in third stream, like if record stores still existed, like where would it be filed, right? Would it be in classical or would it be in jazz? Would you have to create a new section called third stream and explain to people what it is?
Yeah. I also loved, like, I don't know if you remember the Jean-Pierre Rampal and Claude Bolling Suite for Flute and Jazz Piano.
Well, what was that?
That was in the 80s, I think, or something like that.
Might not have been born, Jim.
No, but doesn't matter. You still know who Debussy is, though.
Fair enough. Touche.
And Duke Ellington.
Thank you, Jim.
We spent a lot of time working on the arrangements. So it's primarily, again, just a jazz trio. So it's Paul Hofford on piano, myself on drums, and George Kohler on bass. And a couple of songs we have a flute player named Bill McBurney playing flute. Very wonderful jazz flautist.
Anyone familiar with Bill?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So we picked, well, Gould played the whole entire Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which was transcribed from the orchestral work by Franz Liszt, just for piano. So we did all four movements of that. We did the first two movements of the Sonata Pathétique. We did Beethoven's Fifth Piano Concerto and the Moonlight Sonata.
That sounds like a great selection, doesn't it?
And we've already, like, it's interesting because I think it's, like you said, could cross over. It could easily, just as easily play on Classical 96 as it could on Jazz FM. So I think it's got,
something to consider, Jim.
Yeah.
I'd like to know your thoughts on improvisation. I grabbed the quote, the definition of improvisation from Merriam-Webster's. It's the act or art of speaking or performing without practicing or preparing ahead of time. What do you think about that quote?
I love that. And it's so my approach to improvisation is this. I mean, I think it's like when we're talking right now.
Yep.
We both learned at one point how to speak English, but we're not thinking about it right now. We're not thinking about those rules at the moment. We're just, you learn it all and then you kind of forget it and just do it.
And interact.
Yeah, and there's call and response, there's filling in the gaps, there's all of that going on right now in our conversation. And the very same thing goes on the bandstand with music. I really believe in this idea of like practicing, learning your craft as well as you can, and then when you get up on the stage, just forgetting it all and just being in the moment.
So in this case, the definition of not practicing doesn't really apply to music as an art, right? Because it suggests that you don't have to work on any sort of craft. You can just go up there and do what you want. It's kind of counter to that definition, right? You have to put all the hours in.
Right, the 10,000 hours.
Put your 10,000 hours in, learn everything, and then forget about it.
Exactly.
Go on stage and just let it go, and let your first reaction or your intuition kind of guide you in a way.
Yeah.
Flights of fancy, I guess.
Yeah, and then also, and just again being in the moment, which also, as I was saying that, it reminded me of also ties into my yogic philosophy and yogic practice, which is just to be in the moment. Don't be thinking about what just happened or what's about to happen. Try to be as present as possible.
Excellent.
It's harder to do than to say, but
I'm doing my best to do that. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, Jim, but we're going to have to close it off. I have to go introduce Turboprop.
okay.
Thank you, everyone. Jim Gelcer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lukas.
Good job, guys.